When thinking of the most important players in the justice system, it is common to jump straight to individuals such as judges, prosecutors, and police investigators. However, there is one position that contains essentially unrestricted power to present to juries their own beliefs and assumptions about crime scene evidence as fact, often make them the pivotal witnesses in murder trials. This same power also allows them to indefinitely delay or completely undercut investigations into suspicious deaths that happen within their jurisdiction. The Department of Justice website defines the role of forensic scientists as to examine and analyze evidence from crime scenes and elsewhere, to develop objective findings that can assist in the investigation and prosecution of perpetrators of crime, or absolve an innocent person from suspicion. This series will delve into a few especially strange cases that were led by forensic examiner Dr. Erik K. Mitchell in order to illustrate the true power that this position holds. Erik Mitchell has had a long and turbulent career as a medical examiner, spanning over 3 decades in multiple states. During his career, he has made headlines for his controversial decisions and questionable ethics, the likes of which have caused many innocent people to be convicted for crimes they did not commit, as well as other cases where Mitchell's inefficiency and indecision has allowed for investigations to go cold, where Mitchell has either closed a case before an investigation played out, or waited too long to make a ruling about the death, and by the time he finally did, all of the leads had dried up, leaving the victim's family without closure. In many of these cases, the family is inevitably left wondering what really happened to their loved one, and since then have spent many years searching for answers. The original purpose of this series was to highlight all of the missteps Erik Mitchell has taken in a variety of cases. But upon our investigation of the upcoming episodes, we discovered a story much deeper and much more disturbing. It felt like a good place to start, dating all the way back to 1985 when he was working as the medical examiner in Syracuse, New York, where Mitchell was once considered by the sheriff's office to be a suspect in the murder of one of his co-workers. Nanette Gordon was a 30-year-old intern working in the medical examiner's office under Erik Mitchell. She was in her final year of residency in clinical pathology. A couple weeks prior to her death, she told her friends that she thought someone had been inside of her apartment. She found things like her underwear moved around and money missing from her purse. She was last seen around 11 p.m. on August 16, 1985, when a friend dropped Nanette off at her apartment after the two of them attended a classical music concert at St. James Episcopal Church. Earlier in that day, she had been in Connecticut interviewing for a job at Hartford Medical Center. Nanette was described by her neighbors as being quiet as a mouse, but in the early hours of August 17th, Nanette's upstairs neighbors awoke to the sound of a woman screaming and things being knocked around coming from Nanette's apartment. Nanette's downstairs neighbors also awoke to what they said sounded like a baby crying and a chair being pulled or rolled across the floor. On the following Monday, her upstairs neighbors contacted the manager after they realized Nanette had not picked up the newspapers outside her apartment the entire weekend. She was found dead in her apartment on August 19, 1985. There was no DNA found. Detectives believed that the crime scene had been cleaned and manipulated. She was found in bed. Her nude body was neatly tucked under her bed sheets, with the sheets going all the way up to her neck. Detectives believed her body had been tucked in after she had been strangled. District Attorney Bill Fitzpatrick said it was one of the oddest crime scenes he's ever seen, saying, "It looked staged. It was like someone made it look like she fell asleep," said Fitzpatrick. The scene was most unique in that everything appeared to be in absolutely perfect order, indeed too much so.
Investigators were convinced someone had manipulated the scene.
She was laid out perfectly on her back, arms at her side, bedspread and a blanket right up to her neck, almost as if it was a weight.
One of the cops who was there remembered the bed as being too perfect, It reminded him of an army bunk ready for inspection. There were no signs of a break-in other than a plant that had been knocked over, and her backsliding balcony door was left unlocked. Residents of the building were told the door to the patio was open when the cops arrived. Her balcony stands only 3 or 4 feet off the ground. Her front door was double-locked. Detectives also found dirt from the plant that was knocked over in a closed drawer. Nanette was known for being very clean and tidy, so it would have been out of character for her to leave dirt in a dresser drawer. There was also a large ceramic vase knocked over in the dining area. Deputies investigating her death treated the apartment as a crime scene. Assistant District Attorney John Duncan said, "We are presently treating the matter as a homicide, and the Sheriff's Department is continuing its probe on that basis." Erik Mitchell was the medical examiner in Nanette's death, and despite investigators believing that she was strangled, Mitchell signed her death certificate without indicating a cause of death. He refused to rule about the nature of her death. One undersheriff was quoted as saying, "We believe it's a homicide, but we can't do anything about it without a cause of death." Despite the investigators treating Nanette's apartment as a crime scene, Mitchell refused to rule it a homicide. He also refused to rule out that her death might be attributed to natural causes, even though the autopsy revealed broken blood vessels in the eyes, a bruise on her lip, signs of hemorrhaging around her neck, and indications of petechia in her eyes. Petechia is a hemorrhage associated with bursting capillaries, which break when the oxygen is cut off to the brain. Former District Attorney Richard Hennessy told Nanette Gordon's family that there was no doubt in his mind that Nanette's death was due to foul play. Mitchell's former boss, Dr. Joseph Davis, wrote Mitchell a letter advising him to declare the case a homicide, stating that he, Davis, believed Nanette was killed by someone who is adept in the matters of judo or similar exotic techniques, or a police officer trained in the principles of the carotid artery compression control method. However, Erik Mitchell declined to make a ruling and denied any reason for a second autopsy. Nanette Gordon's family believed she was strangled, and they eventually became so fed up with Erik Mitchell's indecision that they hired lawyer Sidney Maines to review Mitchell's conduct and to pressure the court into forcing Mitchell's hand. Judge Donald Miller criticized how Mitchell and investigators mishandled the case, saying, "If one of my staff died, I'd have torn everything in that place apart." Gordon's lawyer, Sidney Maines, said Mitchell should have recused himself from the autopsy and investigation due to a conflict of interest because he knew Nanette. Mitchell said it was not uncommon for him to perform an autopsy on the remains of a person he knew, and he denied any conflict of interest. In November 1987, Erik Mitchell changed the cause of death from pending to undetermined, which eventually led Nanette Gordon's family to hire a private pathologist who concluded Nanette was in fact strangled. Here's where the story gets strange. Not long after Nanette's death, Erik Mitchell showed up to work wearing a pair of clog boots that belonged to Nanette Gordon. In 1987, Erik Mitchell officially became a suspect in her death after an anonymous employee in Mitchell's office contacted the sheriff's office and stated they believed Mitchell was involved. On July 9, 1987, Mitchell was brought in for questioning, where he admitted to having an affair with a woman he worked with, but denied allegations that he was having an affair with Nanette Gordon. He denied anything other than a strained professional relationship with Nanette Gordon, who he described as aloof and businesslike during her rotation. During the police interrogation, Mitchell told detectives that on the weekend of Nanette's death, he was working late into the early morning hours, and while driving home, he decided to pull off the road and go to sleep for a few hours. Through the investigation of this video, we discovered that Nanette Gordon lived 10 minutes away from the medical office where she and Mitchell worked. Mitchell lived roughly 28 minutes away from work. He pulled over to sleep at Card's Corner, approximately halfway between work and his home. Google Maps shows that he drove for 13 minutes before he allegedly pulled over because he was too tired to drive the remaining 15 minutes. 2 days after Erik Mitchell was questioned by police, his wife called the sheriff's office and told them that Mitchell had written her a 26-page letter where he admitted that he had an affair with a woman at work and that he had an unregistered gun and was planning to take his own life. The sheriff's deputies were preparing to launch a helicopter to search for Mitchell's body. However, the search was eventually called off after Mitchell returned home. He refused to tell anyone where the weapon was. The police never read the 26-page letter because Mitchell's wife would not allow them access to it. Police never obtained the gun in reference either. The sheriff's office conducted a 5-day investigation into Erik Mitchell's alibi before ultimately clearing him as a suspect, having substantiated all but 10% of the weekend. According to Sheriff John Dillon, the only time that could not be substantiated was when Mitchell said he pulled off to the side of the road and fell asleep. When asked about why Mitchell was eliminated as a suspect, Dillon told reporters he wasn't a suspect. He was a guy who had to be interviewed. Other guys had to be interviewed too. In court papers, Nanette's mother Leona claimed Sheriff John Dillon failed to adequately investigate the death, particularly failing to conduct a full and complete investigation of all of the staff of the medical examiner's office. At the end of the police report into Erik Mitchell's whereabouts involving Nanette's death, Detective Laverne Doctor wrote, "I draw the conclusion that the rumors that are going around pertaining to Dr. Mitchell are totally unsubstantiated and no further investigation is required." The court's inquiry into Erik Mitchell's handling of the case told a much different story and raised a number of red flags on his behalf, one of which revolved around microscopic tissue samples taken at the autopsy. These samples may be useful in a difficult case like Nanette Gordon's, experts say, because they might show a disease not seen at the autopsy, such as an undetected heart problem. These samples sat unexamined in Erik Mitchell's office for over a year after Nanette Gordon's death. One source said it was difficult to determine exactly how long after a year it was examined, because it was not Mitchell's practice to date his reports. Eventually the finding came back negative, but Mitchell still refused to declare the case a homicide. Questions were also raised in court about the handling of a semen sample taken from Nanette's body, and the allegation that Mitchell conducted a follow-up examinations of her body after it had been released to a Syracuse funeral home. The district attorney did not specify into accusations made against Mitchell by anonymous informants that were said to relate to mishandling of a vaginal swab taken at the time of the autopsy. Police said she had no known boyfriends, rarely dated, and didn't plan on getting married until after her career had landed. There is very little reporting on this semen sample, but it seems like it would have been a key detail into her death. It's unclear if this sample was lost, improperly handled, or did not have a match. It's also unclear if Mitchell's DNA was ever swabbed. Criminal profiling specialist Murray Meeran made the guess that Nanette's killer was likely a peeping Tom who knew Nanette, possibly even a co-worker. Myron suggested that the killer most likely crept into her bedroom while she was sleeping and killed her after Nanette awoke and recognized her intruder. Myron said the killer was most likely an odd loner with poor social and organizational skills. Murray didn't think the intruder had gone there to kill Nanette. This was reactive. It wasn't planned. It was done for self-protection, Murray said. She woke up to confront the intruder. She knew who it was. The intruder knew he could be identified. He wasn't a stranger or a casual thief. She was murdered to protect his identity. He couldn't believe what he'd done. Myron believes the killer left immediately. Eventually, Nanette Gordon's family pressured a judge and grand jury to review Mitchell's handling of the case. In 1989, the court removed Erik Mitchell from the case and appointed a team of outside medical examiners to review Nanette's death. In 1990, the panel of experts agreed that Nanette Gordon was strangled. In August 1990, with the case finally declared a homicide, police began investigating whatever leads had not already dried up. which led them to Nanette's upstairs neighbor, who originally contacted the apartment manager. A mother and her son lived above her, and police believed the son to be a suspect. While investigating this neighbor, police received a phone call from an anonymous woman who told them that they had the right suspect.
You have the right suspect. You have the right suspect.
Police unsuccessfully sought this woman's identity, but they never heard from her again. They considered the neighbor a suspect, but did not have enough evidence to charge him, and eventually the case ran dry. The neighbor who was considered a suspect has since passed away. TV's Unsolved Mysteries wanted to do an episode on the case in the 90s, but the Nanette's family declined. No one has ever been arrested in connection to Nanette Gordon's death. The court's investigation into Erik Mitchell's office led him to step down from his job in Syracuse, rather than face criminal charges for violations unrelated to the Nanette Gordon case. The inquiry revealed several disturbing stories, including a one where multiple sex offenders took pictures of themselves with dead bodies in Mitchell's office. Mitchell was also the subject of many whistleblower complaints. His co-worker, Dr. William Sawyer, stated under oath that he had witnessed Mitchell slant the interpretation of evidence to serve his predetermined objectives, and he routinely offered opinions without any scientific evidence, and that his interpretation of evidence cannot be trusted as impartial or accurate. Another co-worker, Dr. David Riggle, stated that Mitchell had instructed him to fashion his autopsy reports in a way that would allow for manipulation of case filings. Many of these stories caused a public uproar. He relocated to Kansas, where he would continue to make headlines for more questionable cases.
Anyone with information, call the Onondaga County Sheriff's Office at 315-435-3051.